the Diocese of Rockford, Illinois. The faith was planted here through the labors of a devoted missionary priest. It came of age through the leadership and prayer of Benedictine monks, and is still being written today under the leadership of its current apostle, Bishop David Malloy.
I cannot see it, I cannot sense it, but my faith tells me here is Christ, and take him at his word. This is my body. This is the cup of my blood. That sacrifice is for me as a priest and bishop offering it at the Mass.
This is the story of the bishops of America, the shepherds of the past and the shepherds of today, who through their callings and ministry carry the church into the future. It's also the story of their parish, their church, the cathedral. This is The Chair, an exploration of what it means to be an apostle in America. "85 miles west-northwest of Chicago, sitting on the banks of the Rock River, a tributary of the mighty Mississippi, is the city of Rockford, sea city of the Diocese of Rockford."
You go to the East End and you're close to Chicago, and it's kind of in the air of Chicago. We get here in Rockford and we're an urban center. We go out farther west and it's very much a lot of farming communities out that way. And you learn all of the different nuances and how that affects the different parishes.
The town of Rockford was established in 1834 from settlers who were moving in from Galena, and they chose the location because it was conveniently located midway between Galena and the growing city of Chicago. And in fact, Rockford was first known as Midway as a reflection of that geographic fact. The region that's now the Diocese of Rockford was first served by missionary priests who came up from Louisiana and down from Quebec with a desire to convert the native population. Even though their efforts did not result in a large number of converts, they helped to establish a Catholic presence and Catholic foundations in the region that really started to grow by the mid-19th century as the Illinois territory opened up to waves of American settlement. The arrival of the railroads helped the region around Rockford flourish. And in Rockford, the first Catholic parish, St. James, was established in 1853. It was a simple A-frame structure that was built to serve the largely Irish population that came to help build the railroads. But within just a decade or two, the Catholic population had vastly outgrown that original structure, and they made plans for a larger church. Their efforts helped plant a permanent Catholic presence in the town of Rockford.
The increase in the Catholic population of Rockford is really the result of industrialization. As manufacturing jobs open up in the region, many Catholic immigrant communities are attracted. They're looking for good jobs to support their families. And so in the second half of the 19th century, Rockford becomes this notable output of heavy machinery, hardware, tools, so much so that it eventually becomes the second leading center of furniture manufacturing in the nation.
In this diocese, we see Catholics coming not just from the Irish and German and Italian communities, but we see a great influx of Catholic immigrants from Poland, Lithuania, and other Eastern European communities coming to look for work. The industry that begins to grow in this region is extraordinary. We see a sense of pride amongst these ethnic communities, but pride that isn't just about their faith and their backgrounds, but pride in the craft and the workmanship that they produce in the industries that they're in.
The diocese was established in 1908, carved from the Archdiocese of Chicago to serve the northwestern portion of Illinois. The first bishop was Peter Muldoon. Prior to coming to Rockford, Bishop Muldoon was an auxiliary bishop for the Archdiocese of Chicago. For a while, it was presumed that he would become the next bishop of Chicago. But some in the archdiocese opposed his possible succession, and they actively worked against him, including some sort of smear campaigns against him. But Chicago's loss was Rockford's gain, and the diocese secured a devoted, hardworking, energetic bishop who was able to oversee the diocese in its foundational early years. During World War I, he was an important leader of the National Catholic War Council, which helped to oversee the Catholic Church's response to World War I and its ministry to soldiers during the war.
When World War I was over, the National Catholic War Council morphs into the National Catholic Welfare Conference, which is today the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Bishop Muldoon was the first chair of the Social Action Department, which was the right spot for him, given his support for the rights of labor, his advocacy against child labor. That support for the rights of labor can actually be traced back to Leo XIII's encyclical Rerum Novarum of 1892. Rerum Novarum is generally seen as the first document of Catholic social teaching.
Bishop Muldoon also invited the Poor Clares to establish a foundation in the Diocese of Rockford. He recognized the importance of contemplative prayer and its spiritual value to the diocese. The first Poor Clares arrived in the Diocese of Rockford in 1916, coming from the Diocese of Cleveland. And by 1920, the community had grown so much that they needed to secure a larger property. The life of prayer of the Poor Clares has been a spiritual gift to the Diocese of Rockford, one that traces its origins all the way back to its first bishop.
The second bishop of the diocese, Edward Hoban, also comes to Rockford after first serving as an auxiliary bishop in Chicago. During his time in Chicago, he was in charge of organizing the 1926 International Eucharistic Congress, which was the very first time one of these international gatherings was held in the United States. This week-long gathering of Catholic piety and prayer sent a very important message to the United States, demonstrating the very strong and robust Catholic presence. But it also sends an important message to the Vatican, which at this time had concerns about the stability of the American Church, and who saw the Catholic Church in the United States as susceptible to Protestant tendencies. The Eucharistic Congress demonstrated to Vatican officials that the Catholic faith in the United States was both strong and secure.
Bishop Hoban brought that same confidence with him when he became Bishop of the Diocese of Rockford. He was a strong voice for maintaining a public Catholic public presence, and he also had a great deal of confidence in what the Catholic Church could accomplish, not only in the growth of its own parishes, but also what it could contribute to the community in the United States in terms of education and social welfare. Just as Bishop Muldoon had invited the Poor Clares to the diocese, Bishop Hoban also worked to establish a Benedictine presence in the diocese. He invited the Benedictines to establish a high school in Aurora, which later grew into Marmion Abbey. And to this day, the abbey continues to flourish, building a new abbey church as recently as 1998.
The heart and spiritual home of Catholicism in Rockford is the Cathedral of St. Peter's, an Italianate building originally built in 1960. Today, it is the seat of apostolic authority and the center of liturgical prayer.
At the very beginning of the diocese, the Cathedral of St. James was the spiritual home and cathedral for the people of Rockford. In 1970, however, Bishop Arthur O'Neill designated St. Peter's as the diocesan cathedral. O'Neill formally consecrated St. Peter's on October 11th, 1978.
If you enter the Cathedral of St. Peter's in Rockford, Illinois, and turn around while you're standing in the nave and look back towards the beautiful pipe organ, the pipes of the organ frame a rose window, so a large round window that shows the Trinity crowning Mary. So you have the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is pictured as a dove above the figure of Mary, who's holding a scepter of power, and in her other hand, she's holding an orb that's surmounted by a cross, so that represents the world. So she's being pictured as the Queen of Heaven and Earth. Within the cathedral, the baptismal font is actually located in the narthex. So the narthex is the entryway of the church that's demarcated from the nave, which is the main section of the church where people sit. So this is significant because baptism is a sacrament of initiation. So it's placed within the entryway to show that before we can join the congregation, before we can be in full communion with the church, we must first enter through baptism. We enter this communion of saints through baptism. At the transept entrance of the church, on the exterior, there's a large gold mosaic and 2 statuary figures of Christ and Peter. And in English it says, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I build my church."
For the people of Rockford, their living connection to the ministry of Peter is the bishop, and in each cathedral, the chair, or cathedra, represents his authority as a successor of the apostles.
When you become the bishop, or at least when I did, I think one of the things you really want to take stock of is what's been done here already. What is it we can build upon? But the first thing you do, I think, is you try and look at the positives and see, what are the strengths here? What is it that really serve as the anchors we're going to build upon? Then I think from there, you begin to bring your own insight, your own experiences, where grace is leading you. I think the other thing that at least as a bishop, I've tried to do is just be out there. Try and go out and not be an abstraction to people. But the bishop is the chief shepherd, and so it's wonderful to have ceremonies here in this cathedral.
Bishop David John Malloy is the 9th Bishop of Rockford.
We grew up in a family, an Irish family that was very practicing in its Catholic faith. I have an older sister, and I have 4 younger brothers, one of whom is also a priest. One of the things that we did in my family was, once you made your first communion, you would go to Mass every morning. We were a block and a half from the parish church, so it was convenient enough. One of the other things we did was monthly confession, and I'm very grateful for that. I was an altar boy from 3rd grade on, but I went through my college years doing my pre-medical studies and thinking about being a doctor, but there was always a certain something that wasn't quite sitting easily and calmly, and I got accepted to medical school after 4 years of university studies, and it was very difficult to make the grade for that. But I wasn't comfortable with it, and when there came an opportunity to delay for 1 year your entrance into medical school, I took advantage of that and went into the seminary, and I basically never came back. For 1 year, I was at St. Francis de Sales Seminary in Milwaukee, and after that year, I was sent to the Pontifical North American College in Rome, where I did 5 years of seminary studies, including finishing up with a licentiate in sacred theology. So I did the 5 years, the majority of my seminary studies I did at the Pontifical North American College. I was ordained at my home parish, Christ King Parish in Wauwatosa. After 2 years in the parish, I was handed a letter in which I had been asked to give my service to the Vatican's diplomatic service, which would mean going back to Rome for 4 years more of study, and then being willing to basically travel the world to assignments in the apostolic nunciatures, the papal representations that are all over the world. The Vatican has its embassies and its diplomats. That was a hard decision because I loved what I was doing and felt the fulfillment of what I had hoped to do. So it was no small sacrifice to make that decision, but off I went. The diplomatic service can be both challenging and very fulfilling. There's a lot of loneliness, there's a lot of traveling, there's a lot of instability because you can be contacted after a year and say, we need you to pull up roots and go to another place again. And there's a tremendous amount of behind the scenes responsibilities. You're constantly trying to help a local church incorporate itself into the universal mission of the church. I did 4 years in Pakistan as the number 2 underneath the nuncio. And then I did a year in Damascus, in Syria, again, as the number 2 in the Vatican's diplomatic establishment there. And then from there, I went and I did 3 years in the United Nations, working there. I had various different assignments, one being in Asia, one being in the Middle East, and one being multinational with the United Nations, working with all of those different countries. When I left the diplomatic service in 1988, I went to the prefecture of the Papal Household, which does basically a lot of the scheduling for the Holy Father. So all of these events that you see, not the liturgical ones, but say the Wednesday audiences or the Pope receiving groups in the morning, those are all arranged by the prefecture of the Papal Household. But it was a constant but very invigorating time. When the Jubilee year was finished, I was asked to come back to the United States and asked if I would give my service to the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, the USCCB. I was elected to be the General Secretary. The bishops would say, this is what we want done, and they hand it to you and say, now you make sure that it gets done, it happens. So you were in charge of all of the staffing for the bishops, for the different committees, for the different activities, and that's what I did for those 5 years. I was able to fulfill my heart's desire for 9 months more. I went back to the Archdiocese of Milwaukee into a parish. I was at St. Francis de Sales Parish in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and for 9 months it was just, for me, a wonderful time and a time to sort of reacquaint myself again with the parish spirituality and my parish priestly spirituality.
On March 20th, 2012, David Malloy received a phone call informing him that he had been named the 9th Bishop of the Diocese of Rockford.
At that moment, being in a parish, and after 25 years of waiting to get back in a parish, you felt a little bit of the loss. But when circumstances come, you try as best you can to say, Lord, I'm going to do what you seem to be pointing to me, and I'm going to do it as positively as I can, and you take it from there. That's the tone at the top for yourself. I think for everybody on ordination day, whether it's priesthood, being a bishop, there's that moment of the prostration in the ceremony where the Litany of the Saints is being sung, and you really feel like you're sort of on your face, almost all alone in the midst of this great crowd. You're hearing this prayer to all of the saints, all of those who've gone before you. But you have this sense at that moment of the ceremony of being sort of drawn into yourself and trying to humble yourself and trying to make the most purified offering to a task that you can't really know what's coming, but you'll walk with the Lord and He'll walk with you to try and fulfill it.
Since becoming bishop, Bishop Malloy has led the people of Rockford with humility and devotion. One ministry that he is particularly passionate about is prison ministry.
I go on Christmas morning and Easter morning to the county jail here in Winnebago County in Rockford. And then on the Be Reconciled Day that we have for confessions throughout the diocese, I go to the prison in Dixon, Illinois, say Mass for them, and I hear the confessions of those who would like to have their confessions heard. But why put an emphasis on the prisoners? I mean, I think that's an easily forgotten part of our society. And easily forgotten because if we're not careful, we can let our consciences grow a little bit cold and say, well, they kind of did something and they've kind of earned their reward there. But that's not the way the Lord has put it to us. And He particularly put it to us in the Last Judgment that I was sick and in prison and you came to visit me. And so my going is, first of all, to try and personally fulfill that. That's where the church ought to be. That is what the church ought to be doing. That's the kind of thing that we want the church to be doing. And so it is a reminder to those people, to all of us, about this potentially hidden group of people. Yes, they've probably had their problems, but we can't just cast them off. We can't let them be forgotten. And so I try and go in there and do that. I've tried very hard to accept as many invitations as possible. I do the confirmation circuit, which not only administers this great sacrament of the Holy Spirit, but it is a constant opportunity to have some contact with the parish, have some contact with the parish young people who are there for that moment. It costs you a bit. You end up having to spend a lot of time in the car, going and here and there, and it is, in a sense, the hidden price of being the shepherd who tries to get out and do what Pope Francis said, which is to take on the smell of the sheep. I take that to be the contact with the faithful and to have some sense of their lives and their desires. And I think about the times that I am looking at the host as I say the words of consecration, "This is my body," looking into the chalice at the wine soon to become Christ's blood, and saying the words of consecration, and trying to sort of do what I can humanly to work with the grace to flip that switch internally to say, I cannot see it, I cannot sense it, but my faith tells me here is Christ, and take him at his word. This is my body. This is the cup of my blood. And I think for any of us as priests, that's a way that helps us to keep from getting too casual, to keep us from getting too tired, to try and enter into the Mass as deeply as it is possible. If you do that, you realize that the sacrifice of the Eucharist that is tied to representing the sacrifice of the cross, that sacrifice is for me as a priest and bishop offering it at the Mass.